Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to review the film Shelby Oaks. So I have so much to say about this movie. I'm going to assume the general public doesn't know too much about this little indie film, but I'll tell you now that in the online film circle, this is probably one of the most intriguing and exciting films of the whole year. This film was written and directed by Chris Stuckman, who is a big film critic on YouTube. I've been personally following Chris Stuckman for over a decade now, and I've always seen him as my favorite film critic. And in a lot of ways, he led the way for many other film critics online and on YouTube to be taken seriously. Anywho, Stuckman later on decided to start a Kickstarter campaign for this little horror film that he wrote called Shelby Oaks to get some funding, and because of his recognition in the film world and the film space on YouTube, he managed to raise $1 million, a little over $1 million, and I am actually one of the backers who donated to the film, so at least I can say, I'm on the poster, I guess, like a little snippet on like the big poster. They actually released a little poster for the film with all the backers' names on it, and if you zoom in really far, you could actually find my name in there, but, anywho, Chris got to make this film, though still for far less money than the average horror movie for that Hollywood makes. And you have to understand that most horror movies that come out, even cheap ones, are upwards of $8 to $10 million, which may not be that much money in Hollywood, but is still a lot of money to just the average person. And the film, that he did make was later on acquired by indie distributor Neon, who is one of the biggest in the game right now alongside A24, and they also gave Stuckman a few extra days to film the movie and gave him some extra money to also just put towards it and get some stuff that he really wanted to do and didn't have the time or money for previously. But even so, the final budget for the movie was still reportedly a lot closer to the $1 million range than the $2 million. So, even so, still super, super cheap. Even as Chris Stuckman kind of said, like, this would be made for what Hollywood considers pennies. But on to my thoughts on the film. I'm mainly giving all this context here, so my bias towards the film. I'm probably not judging this film completely fairly because of my attachment to the people involved and just how much I am rooting for Chris Stuckman. And I still try to not let anything get in the way of my opinions. I'll give an honest review to the best of my ability, but I just want to put that out there. And so that way, if you're hearing me talk about this film and you're like, I feel like you may have been a little more harsh in a different movie about the same thing, that may partly be a little true. I'm just saying I'm going to try to judge this movie the best I can. So with that being said, how is Shelby Oaks? Well, I'm happy to say that Chris Stuckman has a bright career of directing ahead of him. I think he has a very strong filmmaking career, very soon upcoming. I think his next couple movies could be really cool. I think he definitely will get another opportunity to make a film. But I'm sad to say that Shelby Oaks isn't a very good movie. And let me explain. I think on a technical front, this is a good movie. Stuckman knows how to get good performances out of the actors. He knows how to craft tension well. He's clearly able to collaborate with the DP, the editor, production designer, sound mixer, and composer to create a cohesive vision. Like, this feels like someone who knows how to steer a ship. Like, for someone who just reviews movies online on YouTube, and this is like his first real shot at making like a full feature film. I mean, he's made a couple little shorts in the past, but this is his full real entry into filmmaking in Hollywood. For someone who's doing that, I think it shows that Stuckman really does have a vision. Like, he is someone who is able to do these things. And he doesn't have, like, the help that a lot of people in Hollywood have. Like, a lot of new directors, they'll have these big studios and big, producers and stuff to really help back them and kind of give some advice if they can't do something. But because this is such a small project, it's really like Stuckman's completely in control of it, and in another way that also meant that he had to work a lot harder than some people would. And I would say, though, Chris Stuckman, though, he really put his all into this movie, and you can see it. You can see that he put a lot of work into it. You can see that he knows what he's doing, and I can't wait to see, what he could do with an even bigger budget. Some of the specifics in this movie are likely limited because of the lack of money behind the film, but I really do think the team did the best they could with the limitations and honestly made the movie that looks like it cost 5 times more than it really did. A choice that the movie makes that I really liked is that it uses a hybrid approach of storytelling and filmmaking. It begins with some found footage, then evolves into sort of a documentary style, only to evolve again into more traditional filmmaking. And I thought each style added something to the movie, and particularly the documentary section did a great job of communicating all the setup and backstory without it feeling too overwhelming. And it also made the paranormal paranoids, like, this team who's sort of involved with all these, paranormal stuff going on, it makes them seem like a real group of people who went missing in a seemingly real town called Shelby Oaks, which is also made up. And I think the story here is solid. It's about a team of YouTubers that explore the paranormal and go missing. And one of the people in that group is named Riley, and she's the sister of the protagonist Mia, who is trying to figure out what really happened to her sister and where she is. This is clearly a personal story for Stuckman, as he stated in countless interviews that in real life he had a sister that he wasn't able to see or talk to for well over a decade because of the specific rules of a religion he was part of when he was younger. And he knew that his sister was still out there despite everyone telling him she was gone and that she wasn't really there anymore. He knew that she was still alive and well and out there. And eventually Stuckman got out of that religion and reunited with his sister, and now they're very close again. But you could definitely feel that there's an emotional core to the story that has a bit of a personal flavor to it that Stuckman really put into this film, and you can tell that's why he wanted to make this movie, is because it actually has something to say to him and isn't just, a standard run-of-the-mill horror movie that you could get from Blumhouse. Nothing against Blumhouse, but I'm just saying, like, a lot of the movies they release are not personal, heart-driven stories. Some of them can be, but not a lot of them. Anywho, the two sisters in this movie, played by Camille Sullivan and Sarah Dern, do a good job. They both convey a lot with what they're given, and you can feel the terror and loss both of them experience. I think both of them communicated that very well. They did a great job. I haven't really seen either of these actors before, but similar to Stuckman, I think they have a very strong career ahead of them if they haven't really gotten much already. It's in all of these areas where I think the movie succeeds and shows just how much of a bright future Stuckman has ahead of him. Just the way he controls the scenes, the way he directs the actors, the way he just kind of puts the whole story together. Like, you can tell that it's personal. It's all these things that shows he has what it takes to make it as a big-time filmmaker. Where I'm rather disappointed with the movie, though, and this really hurts to say, is in the script. And I have deep respect for Stuckman, and if he's somehow listening to this, just know that I'm really rooting for you, man. If you make another movie, I would highly recommend either maybe having a co-writer, and someone else to write the script with you, or just getting more feedback from other writers, so that way you can maybe kind of like tweak some of the problems that were found here. I fully believe Stuckman has the knowledge and the talent to write a good script. I was more just surprised by how many things he's criticized other scripts for doing that he did in his own movie. And I'm not saying that's because he wasn't trying. I'm not saying he just like wasn't thinking about it. I don't know if he just like kind of fell into a trap for some reason. It's just there were things here that like, you would criticize so many other movies for doing, and it's like for someone who has as much knowledge about film criticism as Stuckman, it's kind of like I would have thought this script would avoid a lot of those issues, not fall into them. So that was my big issue with the script. For one, I think there are a lot of plot holes, small details and big details too. I just found myself constantly asking myself why characters did or didn't do certain things that would have made a lot more sense. It's also unclear why Mia chooses to go so many places, bad places alone, when her husband is an established character who still lives with her and talks to her. If he was out of the picture, then it's like, okay, maybe she doesn't really have anyone to trust or go with. But even with the sort of estranged relationship she has with her husband in this movie, it feels like she could have still like asked him like, please come with me to these places. I need to go with someone. It just doesn't feel right. Like she's going somewhere where a lot of people could die, and I'm like, why are you going there alone? Like something's gonna happen to you. I don't know. It just wasn't very smart character choices. It's also unclear how nobody solved this mystery sooner, given the answers the movie provides. I'm not gonna get into much detail there. I'm just saying the way things play out, I was just like, it's really been so long since this thing happened and no one's even come across this. Like, how is that possible? I don't know. I would have liked maybe just a little more, just a couple like throwaway lines to kind of just like tie that up. Like, just be like, okay, this is how nobody figured this out. I also don't feel like the characters were all that developed, even though I do understand the significance of what's happening. All we really learn about Mia from a character point of view is that she loves her sister and wants to have a child. Besides that, I couldn't really tell you anything about her, and that goes for all the other characters too. I just couldn't really tell you much about who they are as people, besides a couple traits and desires they have. But, desires I don't feel like are the same thing as, like, really learning about who someone is underneath. But in his next script, I think I'd like Chris Stuckman to really just try to make his characters, a little more, I guess, well-rounded, a little more developed. I think, that would really make a big deal in how much we care about these people. So that's one thing. The script also just has way too much exposition. We spend basically the first 30 minutes of the movie getting loads of it. And so I kind of assumed the movie would go full steam ahead at that point, but no. Even with all that exposition, I still found myself confused during key moments of the movie, especially during the third act, and things quickly become revealed, but it wasn't very clear, and that mixed with bizarre, questionable character choices and pure shock value made for an ending that, in my opinion, was very unsatisfying. And to be honest, I really thought the movie was mostly fine up until the last 10 minutes or so, but from there it just made too many choices that didn't feel earned or properly set up. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way and just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. The movie also has a bit of a pacing issue. The second act gets somewhat repetitive, and I think there are some areas in the movie that move too quickly, others that move too slowly. And then my final complaint with the film is that there are several sections of the movie that feel a bit too similar to other horror movies out there. And whether it was intentional or not is not for me to say, but I constantly found myself thinking, this seems kind of familiar to this other horror movie I've seen, which I guess is my way of saying that the inspirations for this movie seemed kind of obvious instead of being, a subtle homage to them. And because of that, I think this movie is also kind of predictable. I was able to figure out most of where it was going pretty early on. And so as you can see, I'm very mixed on Shelby Oaks. I wish I wasn't, and I wish I could say I absolutely adored this movie and want everyone to see it immediately. And look, I still think supporting independent cinema is very important. So if you think you're interested in seeing this movie at all and you want to support Chris Stuckman and you want to support, smaller horror movies, I'm still going to say you should go out and see it because I think this movie is important to show Hollywood that making small independent films still works and people will show up for them. And I'll probably watch this movie again once it hits streaming because I'd like to revisit it now that my expectations have kind of been lowered a little bit. I think, going into a movie by your favorite film critic makes your expectations a little bit out of the norm and, again, contributes to that bias a little bit where I'm just going into this movie, like, not even expecting a normal movie, just expecting my, someone I really love to make something great. And when you don't get that exactly, like, it can really, the disappointment might hit a little harder. So maybe I'll enjoy this movie a little more on a rewatch, maybe a little less, I don't know. Obviously, I hope that this movie does succeed, and I hope that Chris Stuckman gets more chances to make the movies he wants to make. I didn't even expect anything, like, game-changing in this movie, given the budget and the size of it, but I was just really hoping that the characters and writing would be a bit stronger. But I still was very impressed by Stuckman's ability to direct, and I think that's my main takeaway from this movie is that he can really direct the film well. He just needs some help with the script. But as I said, I'm really rooting for Chris Stuckman, and I'll be there day one for whatever he makes next. What he did with this movie is still very inspiring to me, and I'm sorry I didn't like the film more. I really wish I did. But hey, it was cool to finally be Stuckmanized. So I'm going to rate Shelby Oaks a C. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.